So it's my privilege now to welcome our speakers for tonight. The first is Rhidian Griffiths. I remember Rhidian when I was a research student writing my doctorate. He comes from Aberystwyth. He has been a staff in the Stafford National Library for 28 years. He's now retired. He is interested with many aspects of music in Wales, including hymnody and the congregational singing. He is president of the Welsh Hymnody Society. So it's a great privilege to introduce Dr. Rhidian Griffiths. Well, thank you very much for the welcome. Thank you for all of you for joining this session. I'm going to share my screen now.
Gobeithio, pawb yn gallu gweld the screen title.
Hopefully, everybody can see the title there. Three church musicians, and these are three people who are active in congregational and choral music at that time, and the three had their contributions to that. And Thomas Jones is the oldest of them, but I haven't got a picture of him. I don't know whether he was tall or short, stout or thin. So here's your imagination. He's not, doesn't seem to have been counted as one of the great people of the church at the time. There he was, if you look at Crockford's in the 1880s, and you see loads of Tom and Joneses, 24 of them, who were ministering in Wales and beyond. And we have to refer to him as Thomas Jones of Llanengan, because there he spent much of his career. But he was actually born in Llanbadarnfawr in Ceredigion on the 12th of July, 1810. But I can't say anything about his early years. The first thing I know is that he graduated in St Catherine's College in Cambridge in 1833, and he began his ecclesiastical career in Worcester Diocese, ordained as a deacon in 1833 and then a priest. And he served as a curate in St Clement's Church in Worcester from 1833 to 1835, and then moved to Llangilynnin in Meirionnydd from 1835 to 1849, and then became vicar of Pwllheli and rector of Llanengan in 1860. He became rural dean of Llyn in 1867 and the Canon of Bangor Cathedral in 1888, and he died at 78, a good old age, as the Caernarfon Cynefin Herald said, on the 28th of April, 1889, and that's enough dates. He had a very varied career in the church without being particularly dramatic, but his particular contribution was in music, and his record in Crockford's says he was an author, noting in particular Welsh church tune and chant book and Welsh canticles pointed for chanting. In the short obituary in Llan, He was
A
an accomplished musician, and he used to organise a Cyman Maganu annual in Llyn. But he was most active as an editor, like the eight editions of the Welsh Church and Chant book. And we can compare him to Ieuan Gwyllt, who published his book of congregational hymns in 1859. Because he actually worked on church music, he didn't get noticed as much as Ieuan, but they were both interested in raising the standard of congregational singing in Wales. And William Crotch is quoted by him.
Or reminds us of what is heard at the parade, the concert, and the theatre.
And Thomas Jones had the same editorial seal as Ieuan, and he says in his introduction to Welsh Tune and Chant book about how he's dealt with the tunes in English now.
Been relieved of the grace notes, flourishes, trills, etc., with which they had of late years been encumbered, and restored to their new original purity and ecclesiastical character. Care has also been taken to have them properly harmonized by competent authors who have made church music their study. Anew, similarly the ortone.
So he'd simplified the tunes to bring them back to what he thought was their original form. And he says that he doesn't feel that English hymn tune collections don't suit the Welsh meters.
New tunes, so-called, have greatly injured church psalmody in Wales. In the towns, this important part of public worship is in general conducted in a creditable manner, but in most country churches it is otherwise. The editor is aware that there exists a difference of opinion as to the cause. He himself believes that it is chiefly the want of proper tunes. If many a country choir had these, the singing would not be so wretched as it is at present. A new tunes dan sylw am
and that those new tunes were the repetitive and overdone tunes that he and Ieuan Gwyllt rejected. And the Welsh Church Tune and Chant book, including arrangements for 4 voices, and he wanted to move from the men singing the top line and the women the tenor. So this wasn't doing justice to the tunes, and he said the women should sing the main tune, and everything should be in order in God's house, and it would be good to think beforehand about the tunes to be used in worship and to consider if they were appropriate. And that was suggesting that people would just choose their hymns at the beginning of the service. And Thomas Jones was helped by Friedrich Weber, a German musician, to harmonize the tunes. And he was an organist in St. James's Palace in London. It's interesting how they might have met.
drawiadol I fod wedi cynhyrchu 8
He
argraffiad ohono rhwng 1859
published
ac 1878.
8 editions of his
Argraffiad
volume
solfa
between 1859 and
wedi
1866,
arddio'n trwy
including
grŵp o
a
blodau
Solfa
Mae'n debyg bod y
edition
llyfr wedi
1872. After that had
Ond mwy
become
na hynny, mae
popular
Jones yn
in
diwydiant
Wales,
cyhoeddus.
and
Teitl yr argraffiad cyntaf yn
they sold well.
Welsh
In
Church Tune and Chant,
1859,
collection of
it was the Welsh
154
Tune and Chant
psalm
book, a collection of 154
tunes.
psalm and hymn
The
tunes.
Welsh Church
By
Tune
the
and
8th
Chant
editions,
book, a
it
collection
had
of
become a collection of 259 psalm hymn tunes. And those had increased through the editions. These became useful resources for further collections by Shadrach Price and Gwen Jones and Ellis Wynne, who recognised their debts to Thomas Jones. But before we leave Thomas Jones, this tune is known as Joanna. Dr. Thomas Jones, the name was Danio. And probably he thought that the Joanna name wasn't suitable for a church tune. And Centennial is the patron saint of the church in Pwllheli, where he was a vicar in 1859, when he published his first collection. And Ralph Vaughan Williams in 1906 used this resource, and he paired the tune with the work of Audrey Chandler Smith in Norton Isabel God Only Wise, and it is known as Centennial in English circles. Well, maybe Thomas Jones will be quite glad of that, even though we remember Thomas Jones as an editor. He was a conductor of Cymanfa Ganu in his deanery. So that's a connection to Owen Humphrey Davies, a Iost Llechyd, who was born in Caerfynod, Llanllechyd, Carnarvonshire, on 18th of September 1820, the son of a watchmaker. He had just 3 months of schooling in Bangor, and self-educated as a musician as well. He was a shepherd in Caerfynod for a few years before working in the quarry. But he followed his interest in music. He was trained as a teacher in the North Wales Teachers Training College in Bangor. And then in 1877, when he was almost 50 years old, he became curate of Rhyw in Penllyn, and then he moved to Llech Gynfarwy as a priest in Ynys Môn, and died there in 11th August 1898. And he became well known as a conductor, the choir in Llanllechyd Church, and then the combined choirs of Llandegau, Bethesda and Llanllechyd. He also led the Penrhyn choir when Queen Victoria visited North Wales. And when Gladstone was in 1861, but he's mainly known for his work as a conductor in the church. In 1862, he was asked to lead the Llandaf choral festival. And he must have made a good impression, because he was invited back in 1864, 67 and 71. he was also a conductor in the archdeaconries of Carmarthen and Cardigan at the same time. And he was a well-known conductor in these choral festivals, which were similar to the Cymraeg Canu among nonconformists. And he, when Llechyd went to Llandaf, diocese in 62, he was there holding concerts and lecturing on church music in all the parishes he visited. So this was an educational role. He lectured in evening classes on church music, teaching people how to chant at the service and the psalms. And he worked with Daniel Evans on the hymn book on the church for the church in Wales. And he published chants for the service, published by Novello in London in 1868. And after that, he won prizes for anthems in the Bethesda Eisteddfodau in the early 1850s. And he was the composer of church anthems, but these aren't really inspired. And he wrote hymn tunes, although it was said when he died that they were popular. The popularity didn't survive. But he was a musician, a musical archivist for the National Authority in London in 1987. He came close to winning on a dictionary of a biographical dictionary of Welsh musicians, and this includes great information on some obscure Welsh musicians as well. And he was very interested in the history of music in Wales. He contributed regularly to the magazine, the Cerddor Cymraeg, and collected folk tunes as well. And he had 2 articles in Canon in 1886 about the way Welsh music had deteriorated. And he was interested in the old Welsh carols as well. And he helped to safeguard the old carols, which are popular again today. And his work was republished in 1948. And in this volume, we have harmonised arrangements of ar gyfer heddiw'r bore, y hediad y glomen, Trymder, Mentor Gwen, and other tunes. And they're still heard in Plygeiniau today. And in the englyn on his gravestone, and saying even though his remains are there, his song was with us all. And then The third musician was mainly an organist. Roland Rogers was from the Midlands of England and spent most of his life in Bangor and was buried in Glenara. He was born in West Bromwich on the 14th of November 1847 and was a child prodigy in music. He graduated in 1871 in music and later became a doctor there. And he came at an early age the organist of Bangor Cathedral and became well known in North Wales. And one who actually instituted new organs in churches and chapels, and he was a composer of organ music, and he deputised for the important organist W.T. Best in Lerpwl when the Lord Penrhyn organised a drawing room concert in 1877, incling Adelita Patti and Edith Wynne performing. Rogers was in the accompaniers, but he wasn't one for the upper classes at all, and he was involved in many local eisteddfodau as well. Even though he never became fluent in Welsh, he was held in high esteem. The genial doctor, they came in the Bangor University and in Rydal Mount in Colwyn Bay, one of his students was the composer RSUs. But he resigned from the cathedral in 1891 because the cathedral authorities weren't happy that he was launching organs in non-conformist churches. And the Balmoral Gazette were very critical of this, as the Gazette said.
Rogers, the organist of the cathedral, recently took part in a recital in a Presbyterian church. The dean wrote strongly disapproving of the cathedral organist doing anything so wicked as taking part in musical performances in dissenting chapels, and stating that he would bring the matter before the special chapter. Dr. Rogers very properly refused to have his privilege as a professional musician curtailed, and at once resigned. It is to be hoped that the chapter will repudiate the dean's action and refuse to accept the resignation. For a more impudent, intolerant, and infantile piece of clerical interference has not seen the light for many a day. Well,
say it as it is, and the Telegraph said.
To see how this affair will advance the cause of the Church in Wales.
Well, whatever the full story is, and there may be some things under the surfaces that we see in the press. Rogers resigned and became the organist in St James's Church in Bangor, but he was reappointed to the cathedral in 1902, and there he was the rest of his life, till he died on the 30th of July 1927 in Bangor. And then this picture shows a conducting staff and his medals, which came from eisteddfodau, and he won the chief choral prize in 1882, 1883, and Liverpool 1884. He was, as the Penrhyn Quarries Choral Union conductor, he became very clear. So the Daily News about when he won the prize, when they won the prize of £100 in 1883. It was said that they sang in better time and did not force their voices, showing intelligence in reading. And that was, even though he wasn't a Welsh speaker at the time, at most of his singers were monoglot Welsh. He had to work through a translator, but his natural talents brought the choir with him. He edited a Psalter for the Church in Wales. So, just like Thomas Jones and Eos Lechyd, Thomas Jones, became the editor of the Emyniadur Eglwys yng Nghymru in 1885, even though Rogers was not in working the cathedral at the time. And it said in the introduction to that volume that his Roland Rogers was the one who was responsible for the volume. And I've heard that the way Rogers avoided copyright problems under the more lax laws then was to change one chord in a tune. And but he is recorded as Roland Rogers Mercy. Thomas Jones, Llanengen, Eos Lechyd and Roland Rogers, I don't know if they knew each other, but they were active in the same area and worked in the same church. Probably they did. So they were editors, educators, composers, and conductors, even if we don't really remember them so much today. We need to recognize their contribution and be thankful for it. And thank you for listening. Well, welcome back to and Canon Geoffrey Gaynor is the next speaker. He was born in Penllechau in the Rhondda Fach, where his family for 5 generations. Then, after the family moved to England, and he was schooled in Coventry, and then in Jesus College, Oxford, in 1977. After being ordained, he began serving in industrial parishes in Llandaff diocese, for becoming a tutor in New Testament in St Michael's College, and he then moved to work in Ceredigion, where he is also very interested in the Celtic languages. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here tonight. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. I'm going to talk about the contributions of two parish priests who are connected to the Oxford movement. The Oxford movement affected Wales fairly quickly in the 1830s, and it involved the Anglican Communion soon as well. But it was in northern Ceredigion that the movement came to the interest of the public when Matthew Williams in Dublin, who was a friend of Isaac John Keble, who established the Church of Llangorwen, and the people still remember that Keble and Newman gifted, e.g. the reading desk to the church. And Evan Lewis, well, is first what we consider, but his father, before he was born, and he went to Ystrad Meurig to school, and to school in Aberystwyth, and to school of his uncle, his uncle in Twickenham. And then he went to Jesus College in Oxford and graduated in Rhidian, and he studied literary maiores and became fluent in Latin, and he could read some of the church fathers in the original languages, and the leaders of the Oxford movement were very keen on republishing the works of people like St Augustine. He was a tall person, they said. He was handsome, and in the college he was fond of rowing and walking, and he became a well-known figure in the streets of Bangor, walking his dog. He was a student at a difficult time in the university because of the religious argument in the church there, and particularly because of John Henry Newham, who eventually went to Rome, and Isaac Williams was accused of being following the Jesuits. So the anti-Catholicism was important in society at the time. Well, Evan became a strong Tractarian and was influenced by Newman for the time. That's why maybe he was made a deacon not in St. David's, but in Bangor, where the Tractarian movement was stronger, and Christopher Bestel, who was the only one who was sympathetic of the Welsh bishops to,
Philip Constable Ellis.
And one of the And one of the arguments at the time was baptismal regeneration. And Bethel had published a book that and he argued that the Book of Common Prayer actually argued for that. And then he became a curate in Llandeisant in Ynys Môn for a year, and then to Llanfaes and Penmon, and then dyna ysgeifiad. And we've heard about Llanllechid, and he went there, and in the leadership, and the Dane Cotton, and he, Lewis, married Cotton's daughter, but he was left a widower at a short time and remarried later. And in Llanllechid, yeah. And then that's where it's thought it made, he did his important work, even though he worked in Aberdare and Dolgellau afterwards. He was fortunate that that was many high church people there, and Nicander had helped Maurice Williams had helped him in his work. And Evan Lewis channeled his energies against the deserting desertion of the people to the chapels, and the one chapel a week was being opened at that time. What do we know about this time in Llanllechid? Well, the Oxford Moment emphasised liturgical worship, and Evan Lewis wanted to change the worship in his parish. So actually the service in Llanllechid was in English before he went there, but he changed that, and the Oxford Moment affected the people worshipping there in a big way. And Evan Lewis was and he wanted to conform to the Book of Prayer. He emphasised so, for example, that you had to be ordained by a bishop, and Evan Lewis was believed centrally in this. And he was also interested in music, and heard hymn tunes tonight, but according to the Tractarians, And yes, Gregorian singing became important in Llanelli, like the Te Deum, for example, and the canticles. And one of his contemporaries who worshipped there in a letter to a son in October 1816. Spoke of a florid Anglican chants. In 1864, Evan Lewis, with his fellow priest, Vanessa Jones, a psalter on the with the emphasis on the beauty of worshiping God. And when Christchurch was Bethesda was opened at nearest time on Llanelli, there was a great emphasis on Gregorian chant. He had an interest in the pulpit as well. Sometimes we see this contrast between the sermon and the sacrament. And when the early Zacchaeus was attacked by the vicar of Llanbedr, for too much typology in the sermon, but Evan Lewis and like Evan Pusey, one of the leaders of the Tractarians, had a great emphasis on preaching, and he wanted to explain the truths in a simple way, and in his sermon in 1848 on Ascension Day, he mentioned that from Advent to the Trinity, concentration on Christ, and then on our our commitment to God and people. When the Dean H.D. Edwards died, suddenly he showed his empathy then. Well, it was alleged they were betraying Protestantism and really working for papism. An interesting story is that his experience visiting a worker who was shaving, but the argument so that the curate left, and the man ran out saying papism, papism. Well, Evan's older brother did turn to the Church of Rome shortly after John Henry Newman, but Evan Lewis was not happy with that decision, and he was proud of being a member of a church before the appearance of Augustine in England. And this was different, but different to Pusey in his sermon, Canon of Faith, whereas the Welsh emphasised their more ancient roots. But among many Welsh people were against the Roman Catholic Church, and when in 1850 the hierarchy, Roman Catholic hierarchy was re-established, and that there was a protest by many clergy in Bangor at that time, including many high church clergy who opposed this. Philip Constable, Evan Lewis, and Philip Arthur Jones signed this document. He definitely didn't side with papism, and that was the view of the majority of the Tractarians, even though some of them were more extreme in their attitude to the Reformation. Many lay people became convinced of the status of the Anglican Church, but when over half of the people and even 80% of worshippers, 1851, were non-conformist. And the weakness of the church had been exposed there, and there was a concern to reach the Welsh speakers. Lewis was had his weaknesses, but he was very much respected in Llanllechid because of his pastoral care, etc. And one said, by his knowing nature, he won the hearts of all. We must as well consider his relationship with nonconformists. He lived at the time when the relationship was becoming bitter at the time. And some high church people were criticised heavily for particularly the apostolic succession. One popular preacher in Bangor, in John Phillips, disagreed strongly with this, and he wrote an editorial in local paper looking about the conversion of Lord Fielding to the Church of Rome. And he said it would better something had said that it was better to the Church of Rome than the sects. And that's right. And it said that in the New Testament, and said there were only ministers and deacons in the New Testament, and there was no hierarchy of bishop, priests, and deacons. And John Lewis actually wrote a book on the apostolic succession and explaining his standpoint in a very well point, and responding to these arguments, and adding a long appendix looking at the development of the tripartite ministry in the Pastoral Church, and then said that the only people who could ordain were those who were in apostolic succession, and the episcopal hierarchy was so obvious in the scripture as to be accepted for 1,500 years, and to safeguard the unity of the body of Christ. And we have to stick with this. And he said he disagreed with the formation of the other sects, which of course was the argument used by the Church of the. And he moved to Aberdare, and he established a Welsh language there. Even though his predecessor had been evangelical, he turned it to a Tractarian parish. He was a man of strong opinions, and who was very concerned for Wales and its heritage, and so he was respected, if not by his organist in 1890. Well, Griffith, Arthur Jones is another one I want to look at. Something with his background. He was the only son and the fifth child of John and Charlotte Jones, Griffith Arthur, who was brought up near Corwin. Yeah, his father was a high churchman. He went to Jesus College about a decade after Reverend Lewis, and he graduated in the arts in 1851. And during his time there, he test to Dr. Pusey, who was influential. Many people after Newman turned to the to Church of Rome. He was ordained by Bishop Bethel, and he didn't go to St. David's diocese, and he was a priest in Bangor diocese. Griffith Arthur Jones is connected with Llanegrin and near Tywyn, and St. Mary's Church in the Docks area of Cardiff. And he stayed there until he retired in 1903, and he was buried eventually in Catay's cemetery, and thousands lined the streets to pay tributes to him. So, only it was considered it 74 considered an extreme ritualist, and many have felt that sectarianism caused a rift between the chapels and the churches, and that certainly seemed to be true. And the established church was betraying Protestant principles, and people were very concerned about matters of faith at that time, and disagreed with each other on matters of faith, but many people had great respect for him, as what happened at his funeral shows. But we need to look as well at his attitude to the Welsh language. But people say that the Tractarians were an English-based movement from Oxford, and by Newman, Pusey, etc. And I would like to say that their attitude to Welsh language, and we a conference in 1887 in Llandaf Diocese, where the language issue was discussed, and Griffith Arthur Jones believed that he should teach people in their own language, and language, Welsh language, was not popular then, with the Welsh language declining. So when he organised to missions in his parish, he did organise it in both Welsh and English, with George Boddy doing the English work. And he recognized that that people had moved to the chapels because of the lack of use of the Welsh language. So he worked with others and ensured that there were Welsh services in the city, in the centre of Cardiff, and then offered one of his churches for this. And after the second mission in 1888, he established a pattern of Welsh service on the first Sunday of the month in his own parish.
At the Welsh Communion during the mission to make sure service most desirable. Yn y pen draw, wrth gwrs, wnaeth
In the end, Eglwys Dewi Sant became the Welsh church in Cardiff. Griffith, Sir Jones, was responding to the need of his flock. But some people who were not appreciative of his work in Welsh, but Griffith Arthur Jones knew much about opposition. So the presence of a Welsh congregation in the church in Wales in Cardiff is a tribute to Griffith Arthur Jones and his work. What maybe we're missing is the spiritual meaning of the Welsh language. The Welsh language tended to be talked about as some kind of problem in the church. That we should be grateful to Emrys ap Iwan, a non-conformist minister, for bringing attention to the spiritual significance of the Welsh language and talking about the Pentecost occasion where people heard the message in their own language. So Emrys ap Iwan said we should offer our language as a praise to God. And I agree with that. But when he died, he has
services for the church in the most important town in Wales.
Yeah. And when he died, the last rites were effectively in Welsh, and the Welsh hymn was sung at his bedside. Well, Griffith Arthur Jones, if it wasn't for lay people, couldn't have ministered in Llanegrin or the St Mary's Church in Cardiff. He came to Llanegrin because the landowner who had been in Jesus College as well. We know Edward Watkin, who owned many Welsh manuscripts. The parish was in a terrible state then, and many had turned to nonconformity, and the parish was in the care of an old man who didn't even live in the parish in Cardiff. Lord Bute arranged for to entice Griffith to come there. Yeah, although he, as somebody who became a Catholic, he couldn't appoint directly. But Griffith Jones came to a disadvantaged, poor parish, and he engaged the people, and it showed the commitment he had. He loved the souls under his care, and children were very fond of him. He influenced on a complete congregation. Some and others, some had left the churches in Cardiff, but he raised a whole generation of church people who shared his views. The trouble came who interrupted services, some who weren't members of the church at all. One of his greatest attributes was his work among the poor, and he showed during time what is shown on his tablet. According to Cardiff Times, 1906, he worked for the poor and spent much of his time to help them. And he responded warmly to those in need. And it should be noted that he brought nuns to the parish because he emphasized their contribution a great deal, and that continued till the 40s of the last century, 40 years after he died. He was condemned by many for his views, but the Bishop of Llandaff condemned the use of incense in parishes, but this was opposed in his parish. And two blind people said nothing in the house appealed to them than the sweet smell of incense. But more than that, the official statement of the congregation they opposed any objection. Those condemned the Rhidian attitude of the bishop, and according to the John Zanke, worked on the constitution of the church in Wales, to say the same thing. And well, Cardiff became a Wesleyan minister, said that the man who led ritualists in Llandaf, that because of his fellowship and his commitment to reach people through emotions, not through just ritual. He wasn't committed just to external things, but to enriching the ritual of his church, and thanks be to God for people like him. Thank you for that contribution. Do we know what's the response of the bishops of the church in Wales generally to high church people like Arthur Jones? Well, if you read the parts of the his funeral, Arthur Jones's funeral. No, there were people who didn't agree with him there, but no, the hierarchy were there. Well, Van Thirlwell, Copleston, others. At the beginning of the movement, they felt it was created. They felt that Newman in tract 90 had misinterpreted the 39 articles, and it was felt that Griffith Jones was extremist, and this became obvious in the church convocation in the end of the 1880s, when well, some other people, members of convocation, came to St Mary's Church, and newspaper reports reported this, even though it was had sorted Welsh language service, where was doubtful because the movement grew, Llandaf, including Manwith at the time. There were many complaints towards the end of the 19th century. Brian Rodwick has discussed this in his PhD at St Lempeter. So even there was respect, there is an example, there wasn't much sympathy with his ritualism. Well, time has beaten us, but at the end of the official session, so we can have a discussion over Cuppa. So I can ask Canon John Walters to offer acknowledgements, please. Well, it's privilege to listen to the seminars, and thanks to the Church in Wales and St Padans for arranging them, and thanks to Rhidian and Jeffrey to lead us about the later 19th century, and about these people who try to enrich our tradition and our worship and the beauty of holiness. And it would be good to see the contributions in the third volume of Gofal ein Gwynplaine. So thank you for your contribution. Thank you, Adrian.